What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan. I'm delighted to be joined today by Bryan Lacey as we prepare for Oktagon 54, which goes down this Saturday night in front of a 10,000-seater audience. Bryan, I know you've done a commentary for a lot of these big shows and all that. I was watching back a few of them preparing for this card, but it must be great to look at the Ovstar Arena, I believe it's in. You look at the capacity, see it's 10,000 and see it's going to be filled out. It must be great to know that's coming up a weekend and know you're involved with something like that.
It's pinch yourself stuff, mate. Honestly, you sit there and it's one of those things where I always take the moment where I try and remember being there, not just doing the job, not just being crazy, but some of the big walkouts or just the crowd pops and for me as well, watching the fighters experience that. We've got a lot of debutants coming to Oktagon for this card, and seeing them feel it for the first time. That's one of my favorite things as well.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Like, I think it's great. Like we've talked about it many times now about I suppose Oktagon coming on and there being another area for people to fight in, but also the experience of fighting in front of such big crowds. I think it's massively important too. Like you see people who go, let's say they go to the UFC and they have been at an Oktagon or a KSW or a cage or something like that, just to be in the proper cage in front of a proper crowd and to experience that is great. And like even if they don't go somewhere else, to be the experienced fighter in the Oktagon promotion, in the KSW promotion, whatever promotion it might be, it's absolutely fantastic. And the more of that, the more of that, the better. Before we get into this card, and before we get into the whole tournament and everything like that, I want to just get your quick thoughts on Will Fleury signing for Oktagon. Obviously, I'm coming out of Ireland here, and Will has been a big star in Ireland for a good while. How I see you're giddy with excitement about Will coming over to Oktagon.
Giddy indeed, mate. I did a little podcast with him about a week and a half ago, and I mean, when I first started doing MMA, which was maybe 2015, 2016, he was coming up and through. So I saw him in Battle Zone, I caught him there, and then I watched him come all the way up through Bama. And, he's always been that big personality. He's always been exciting in the cage. And when he signed, I didn't know anything about it till he put this video out. So I don't know if you've seen it, where he does basically calls out the whole lightweight. Even his teammates, even like Javier, who's training, Johnny Walker's best mate who trains at SBG, he's calling him a bitch and he's calling him all this stuff. And so I was like, it's kind of the injection we need. We need big personalities, but he can fight as well, mate. So I'm very excited. And that light heavyweight division, he can knock that wide open with one big performance. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
100%. I think like for Irish MMA, I think it's a good landing place for Will after what happened with PFL, obviously failing the test and everything like that, serving his time and coming back. I think like a lot of the PFL Bellator crew, are going to be let go. I think whether it's Irish fighters or outside of that, and I think a place like Oktagon is somewhere where you can become a star. Like I remember lads back in the day that found it very hard to like find a place like Oktagon or find a big promotion to make them and start to drive them onto the next level. So I think for Will, someone like Will, it's absolutely perfect, and I'm looking forward to seeing him coming in and challenging some of those lads. I know I saw it was we broke the news, and I was it me or was someone in Severe Mania who broke the news, and that video came out and it really usurped our news break because he just went mad at absolutely everyone. But I'm looking forward to seeing it, and it should be a fun run. Right, yeah. Let's get into this card. Before we get in though, could you just explain to us this Tip Sports Game Challenger tournament? I know this isn't the first time it's happened now, but for people maybe who haven't seen these tournaments before, can you just explain how it works, what's on the line and everything like that?
Yeah, no worries. So last year we started it. This was the first time we ever did it, 2023. And our betting partner in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they came forward and they said, we want to put a project on with Oktagon, and we want to put up €1 million as the prize pot. So that is what is the potential for people to take a chunk out of in the winnings. So we looked at what we could possibly do, and we wanted to do it instead of doing multiple weight classes and really dividing that money up into small chunks. We thought let's focus each year on one weight class. And last year it was the welterweights. And for me, it was one of those things where it delivered every single time. Like the opening show was in Ostrava last year, and we had all 16 of the contestants, all the fighters fighting on the same card doing the press conference the night before. You know, all these fighters, some known to Oktagon, some from outside, some coming back from the UFC, some rising stars as well. And for me, it was one of those things where you see them all together, and then you realize what's in front of you. You've got 5 tournaments, which this 5 events, which this tournament will be played out over, and you have no idea which way it's going to go. These matchups, initially they're decided by the matchmaker, so the first run will be the matchmaker making the matchups. After the first tournament, will be down to 8 fighters. Those 8 fighters will then, at the press conference following the fight, decide their own fate. So they will go through and they will draw their next opponent. So we'll get them in order of their rankings. They get to pick a ball out of the magic goldfish bowl in the middle. Between 1 and 8, we'll decide what number they get to go and choose. And then they'll stand in the brackets that they would like to pick. So they can either pick an empty bracket and hope someone, you know, that they want to do will pick them, or they can decide their own fate. And last year it was one of the biggest bits of drama. The first event delivered as far as the fights, but then in the press conference afterwards, to watch the fighters then decide their route, their next, you know, contestant was as exciting as the fights themselves. And then over the next 4 tournaments from them, it builds till the finals, where one fighter will walk away with a check for 300,000 euros. And last year we had big moments like double knockdowns. We had crazy submissions. There was an inverted omoplata by Lewis Glissman. We had fighters that nobody really knew of before, like Jon Sherdog, come back into the game. And now he's been given the Oktagon Breakthrough Fighter of the Year last year. So this is a tournament that's broken up throughout the year, but it was the spine of everything that Oktagon achieved last year. And for me, I called it the jewel in the crown, and it really was. It was exciting for the fighters, you know, the level of the fights and just the gravity of the tournament really shone through. It was amazing. And this year we're doing it in lightweight. So, you know, the book is yet to be written. We've got fighters from, I think, 13 or 14 different countries in this one, and the best from most of the countries that are there, like number 1 or number 2 in the lightweight division from there.
There's some great names in it, and we'll get to that in a second. I want to talk about the main event first, but I love that the tournament, and I think there's so many people in the tournament as well. Like, even if, look, injuries are going to happen, people are going to fall out. Even if that does happen, you can bring people in a tournament like this where there are so many names, and I think it's good. And I think, you know, we've seen tournaments down through the years in mixed martial arts, and some have been great and some have been not so good, but like, I always like the effort, like especially these days where, you know, the tournament that said PFL do is very different, obviously, from this. They do the regular season and they do the playoffs and everything. So we actually like, I think there's a big gap in the market for a tournament like this that people actually like, and with the quality of fighter as well. Like some of the names like Makwan Amirkhani, Daniel Torres to me are the 2 standouts. We'll talk about more in a second. I think it's, you know, I think it's something for, say, a promotion that's coming into the minds of people in, let's say, the English-speaking world as a new promotion. That's something that'll get people in, and I think it's a wise decision, I think, to do that and continue to do that and use the money that way as well. It's definitely a smart decision.
There's a twist in the money as well. So TipSport this year have given 2 million.
Oh,
okay,
nice.
So 1 million is for the fighters, and 1 million euros will be there'll be an opportunity for the fans to win chunks of that. So part of the tournament, as you said, if say there's injuries, last year we were so fortunate, because when you see these tournaments and it's over 5 events, and because it's fighting, you think there's no way that people will get through clean. There's no way that it's going to be a case of you can get from A to Z without some injuries or some change ups. So we've got a thing which means that even if you lose your first fight, the fans could vote you back in. So we call it lucky loser. And the fans will be able to interact and pick their favorite fighter to come back, and they will be the reserve fight for the next set of fights. So again, even if you lose the first one, you could still be in with this chance. But what we had so much fan interaction. One of the big things and takeaways from this was how involved fans wanted to be with this. You know, they really got to know the fighters. They got really behind their country, like Greece and Serbia, which was the final we had with Mikhalides and Bojan Veličković at the end of last year. The amount of interaction we had from the Greek, from the Serbian, from the German fans. So TipSport have recognized that, and there will also be a chance now for fans to take a chunk of an extra €1 million that TipSport just chuck it on top. That's all they're doing, just an extra million on top of there, Sean.
I need him as a sponsor over here. Bring him on. That's what we need. People just throw their own million quid. That's cool. That's another way to get fans in as well.
Isn't it? Yeah,
I like
exactly.
that.
It's the game.
Indeed. Let's talk about the main event of Oktagon 54 so before we get into the tournament. Just talk about Patrik Kincl for a second, because like every time Oktagon comes up, his name kind of comes up. He seems to be, the poster boy for a lot of these big cards, and especially, him coming from the Czech Republic, being the type of fighter he's like. Looking at some of his fights over the last couple of days preparing for this, he's like he's a guy who doesn't look like he can do what he can do. He's like a muscular sniper, which is a very odd thing in mixed martial arts, to have his body type so big and so strong, but to be able to throw the shots that he does and to have good cardio too. He's a real star for Oktagon, isn't he? And is there any story or anything you could tell us about Kincl and to describe how big of a star he actually is for Oktagon?
It is one of those things where you recognize when a country is truly behind a fighter. Like Patrik Kincl, he's been a pro since around like 2007, something like that. He's flown the Czech flag and he's fought in some of the biggest, baddest promotions against some of the craziest opponents. But he wasn't in Oktagon when it started getting big. He really was sort of, I think it was KSW he was in, a couple of other promotions. But he saw what was happening with Oktagon, and he never held what is the title in his own country. So he came back with a mission because the guy at the time was Vermola. Carlos Vermola he's the McGregor of Oktagon, and he holds a win over Patrik Kincl. When Patrik Kincl was coming up, Vermola absolutely smushed him in their fight back in 2016. So Kincl came back sort of as the second fiddle behind Vermola, and people were like, is he still as good as he is? And since he's returned, he has got better and better every time I've seen him. And we've seen the crowd respond to him. It used to be at the press conferences, they'd be all for Vermola. But what we've seen now is Kincl, through his performances back in his home country, back in the Czech Republic, he's reignited himself, not just as far as an athlete, but also, as a personality in sport, as a persona in the Czech Republic. But for me, he's so hard to beat. He's good everywhere. His wrestling is fantastic. He stuffed every one of Carlos Vermola's takedowns. Then you look at his striking, the spinning, or the head kick KO of Alex Lahore. He's such a versatile and, like you said, athletic, nimble middleweight with power, with experience. And he's one of those guys that when he wasn't in Oktagon, especially coming from the Czech Republic, and he was fighting elsewhere, it just didn't feel right. But now he's back in his his home promotion, and he's selling these arenas out. When we last called this fight, 20,000 people were in the arena to watch him make that walk and take on Carlos Vermola. It's a phenomenal following he's got, and it feels like, even though he's been a pro since 2007, this is the best he's ever looked, for sure.
100%. It's interesting you mentioned, obviously, himself and Vermola fought in his last fight anyway, and he won that fight. It was a grueling. It wasn't a fight a year could do. Let's put it that way. But it was a grueling.
Try commentating on that one, Sean.
No, thanks. No, I'll leave that with you. But look, Vermola basically held him against the cage for 5 rounds, and he won the fight. We know there's no need to go over the scoring criteria how it works, but he won it. By basically landing the better shots. But I think it's interesting coming into this fight with Piotr Wawrzyniak, whose name I just absolutely butchered. I watching a few of his fights. He's relentless, just in all areas. I would say he's a better grappler than he is a striker, but his striker's also relentless. He's mad. He just lets his hands fly. But I feel like if Vermola can get him into those sort of positions, I think Kincl is going to have to avoid him against Piotr, because I think he is really good at kind of pulling guys to the ground from those positions, little trips, or even before it gets there, like a double leg or a single, to actually like kind of put you off balance before it goes into a clinch. I think, when you get to the clinch, it's maybe a little bit of an advantage to the guy, obviously the guy defending, which in this case would be Kincl, I think. But that part of the matchup, to me, that's key. I think if Piotr can get him down, if he can get him down before those long clinch battles, it's an advantage for him. But if he can't, look, on the feet, it's going to be very hard to find anyone who can move with Kincl, and I don't think Piotr will in this one. But how do you see it going? Do you think that clinch battle as well is a big thing? It's like, after watching the last fight, maybe I got caught up a little bit too much in the clinch because there was so much clinching in it. But look, it's hard to watch that fight and not think that someone else won't try to do a similar thing, but just maybe a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, I think if he's watched that fight, that might be Piotr. And again, this is the surname. When they replaced Kincl with this guy, I was like, the matchmaker's just trying to give me the hardest names to pronounce. Wawrzyniak. There we go. We'll give it that. When they replaced him, and like, I watched his fights back, and I think, you picked out a good area for him, because he's one of those fighters that makes stuff happen. It's not the prettiest to watch. He's kind of wild. He's aggressive. His pressure is certainly something that Kincl's got to be aware of. But the cage is big, and Kincl uses it really well. We've seen that against fighters like Patrik Kincl, who tried to do the same to him, and other fighters as well that have tried to contain Kincl. And his striking is loose. He's almost got like a karate stance when he's fighting. But Piotr is definitely a handful, and he's dangerous, and he will bring it for 25 minutes should it go that distance. So for me, I think the odds, and if you're looking skill set wise, and if I were to be teaching technique to somebody, I'd much rather be showing Kincl's breakdowns of certain positions or combinations or defenses than Wawrzyniak. But because Wawrzyniak is kind of unorthodox and a bit wild, I think that is something that could play into his favor, particularly in those positions that you've already highlighted, the close clinch up against the cage. He has a good rate of being able to cause damage in those positions, or just break you, just wear you down. You watch some of those Babylon fights, and they just look exhausting. They're tiring to watch, yet alone imagining being in there with that guy. So it's a great main event. This will be for the so this will be to unify the middleweight belt, because Wawrzyniak won the interim one against Vlasto Chepo. I think it's a more exciting fight than the Chepo one. Chepo won't like me for saying that, but I think Chepo is very one-dimensional as far as big hitter, big knockouts in the first round, big finisher. But I think Kincl will have to be switched on, and he's coming back from quite a bad injury as well. He broke his orbital, and that was only 8 weeks ago. So for me, when you're going in against somebody who's going to be grinding, putting their head in that position, and constantly throwing shots, elbows, wherever they can damage you from, I think this is one that should be Kincl's to win, but Wawrzyniak is definitely there, not to roll over.
Yeah, Kincl was my pick. I was just about to say, but after hearing about the broken orbital 8 weeks ago, I'm not too sure. But I'll still ride with him. But that's massive though as well. Like, bringing injuries, we saw with Volkanovski there last week, bringing and not necessarily brought an injury in with him, but after being knocked out not too long ago, you can't help but think about it. I suppose if you basically broke your face 2 months ago,
they're factors. They're absolute factors. And it's like this. The other thing, because Lozan Keita was supposed to be on this card. He's still going to be in the Tip Sport Game Changer, but he'll fight in Frankfurt instead, so he's not in the opening round. But he came back from his leg break against Mate Sanakidze 5 or 6 months later, went back to training and just drilling kicks, fractured his leg again. So the human body needs that time to recover, and as superhuman as these guys look, it still needs that time. And I think, and I know it was bad with Kincl. I know it was, it was nasty. It wasn't just a clean break. It was depressed, and it had to be pulled back out and all that stuff. So for it to be fully healed and going up against a guy like that, I don't want it to be a factor, but it possibly could be. Interesting.
I'm sure he'll be looking to get it out of there pretty quickly, though. Maybe so.
Spinning with everything. Let's go.
If we're back in the first round knockout, maybe that's a good one here with Tip Sport over there. Right, let's talk about a couple of these tournament fights, and obviously we'll talk about them more kind of as the year goes and everything like that. Look, the standout for me is Makwan Amirkhani against Mohamed Mashev. 13-1 prospect coming through. I watched a good bit of him. He's only 24 years of age. I would describe him as a modern MMA sniper. He's one of these guys, like, he's always awake, but he's not always thrown, which is smart. I think it conserves the cardio a little bit, waits for his opportunity. He's one knockout. He's been knocked out very badly, as in that fight. But other than that, like, his hands are fast. We saw to mention the Volkanovski Topuria one as well. The faster hands, the faster guy, the more powerful guy. usually wins those sort of fights now when it's a modern guy like this. But he's fighting against Amirkhani, you know, who we all know who has knockout power, who is very good on the ground as well. We've seen, his name is Muhammad Makhachev. You might think he's the best wrestler in the world. He's more of a striker than a wrestler without a shadow of a doubt. And he has been taken down a few times as well. If Amirkhani comes in here with a smart game plan, a good game plan, Amirkhani has the skill set to be able to beat anyone. But I think if Muhammad can bring it into the later rounds, if he can, weather that early storm, I think he has the beating of him all right. But this is a big test for a young kind of up-and-comer, 14 fights into his career, isn't it? It's an exciting one to top out, I suppose, the first round of the lightweight tournament.
Oh, it's so exciting. And you know, the name on every one of the fighters' lips that I spoke to, as far as when I was saying, because they don't get to pick that fight. So, the tournament's in their hands from the moment after they win this first one. But everybody wanted Makwan. Everybody wanted Makwan. They wanted that guy. He's got the strongest resume as far as the level of competition he's fought. He's an enigma as far as, there's the skill set he brings and the personality as well. He's disappeared for quite a while. So there's that's going on with it as well. What's he going to look like coming back? Moving up to lightweight from featherweight as well. But Makhachev I got caught in a rabbit hole of his fights. So usually I'll watch a couple and then I'll make a few notes. But I just kept clicking. I kept clicking and going back further and just watching him sort of emerge through Austria. And he's such a good decision maker in the cage for such a young fighter. And for me, this is almost not the youngest. You got Nafeni Nafuka in the tournament. He's 20 years of age. But Makhachev, almost the youngest in the tournament, taking on the guy with the most experience. Makhachev is, untested on a big European stage, on a world stage, but I think he's ready for it. I think he certainly is. And for Amirkhani to come back into this tournament, any fight will be difficult. But I think this kid in particular, because this scalp will be huge for Makhachev. He's got a massive amount of support in Austria. He's a superstar there. He's done all he can do in those promotions. But yeah, to see these ones battle out is great. My question is, how's Amir going to look as well? I think that could be the deciding factor. He has been away. I know there was issues with, a lot of fighters get it coming out of the UFC. What's next? Is it all over? Things that come with that. And he's been open about talking about that. But I've seen him from the tournament where he first, spoke to Oktagon. He turned up and he was big. He was big. And I've watched him. He's come to a couple of other ones and he looks in such good shape. And mentally, when he's been around, he looks kind of dialed in. So yeah, young lion versus the Mr. Finland with the greatest topology picture, I think, of any fighter. Do you know? Have you seen it? You must have seen it.
Does he like a top hat or something? What am I going?
He's drenched in 4 blonde Finnish women. So that's most of the time they've just got their fists up. So it's a great fight, and this sums up. This encapsulates what this tournament is about. Austria versus Finland, young fighter that's rising star against proven quantity. And we saw in the last tournament, we saw people come through in the welterweight division that many thought were done and dusted. Andreas Michailidis has never looked as good. Bojan Veličković rose to the occasion. So can Amirkhani do it, or will Makhachev have his day?
I think the next two are similar sort of things. You have Germany versus Spain in Duke against Grabinski. Like Grabinski, people might know him. He was off the McGregor season of The Ultimate Fighter. Like he's one of these guys that throws, shots from his very high hands, very good defensively. But I think he's a guy who's very good defensively when he's throwing. When he's kind of standing there waiting for guys to throw, I think he comes into problems. But I think one of those guys that if he's a workhorse, he's very good. But sometimes he likes to think he's a show pony, maybe. And I don't think that works out for him. And Duke, on the other side of it, a very good grappler. When he gets the fight to the ground, he's very good. And he kind of throws those big hooks into wrestling. And just to add to that as well, the Vladimir Lingal against Daniel Torres, like I was so excited when I saw Daniel Torres on this, the only guy to beat Saladin Parnass at the correct weight class. What a talent. And then the Lingal young lad, let's call him that, he's come back against Sheck. Well, I think I'd never seen that fight before until last night. That's one of the best comebacks. It reminded me of Pat Barry, Czech Congo. It was absolutely unbelievable, throwing those big spinning elbows, hip tosses. You were calling that, weren't you? That must have been an unbelievable fight to call. That was crack.
It was, and he's from the Czech Republic, and that was in the Stranicas. That was the open air stadium one. And it's 7,000, so it's the smallest show they do. Sold out. We did it 2 nights in a row, 7,000 people, and it was as loud as 20,000 people when that happened. Everybody's jaw was on the floor. The combat was crazy, and that, you know, Lengal is someone who's come from Muay Thai, come from boxing. He's the Czech champion in boxing. He, in 2022, he was voted Fighter of the Year. He had 12 professional fights in 2022. I think 4 MMA fights and the rest boxing or Muay Thai. And he went 11-1 over that time, including fighting Karo Rishavi, who's an Oktagon fighter at lightweight. Took him on short notice and was losing the first round, and then threw a spinning elbow which broke the guy's jaw. And I mean, you know, he couldn't hold it up. The guy called the fight up for Chavez. So you've got Lengal here wanting to prove himself on a big stage against Torres, who's already done that. People are talking about Torres being the favorite in this tournament. You know, his skill set, the kickboxing background. He's such a good, well-rounded mixed martial artist, but his striking is exquisite. But going up against Lengal, that's his bread and butter. So I think that's, for me, that's my pick for fight of the night. I think if people are looking at the whole card, I think those two coming together stylistically could steal the show.
100%. I would agree with that. Like Lengal, he doesn't have the best record in the world, 6-3, but he's almost one of those guys, like, you don't matter what, it doesn't matter what his record is. He's just such a fun fighter. You're going to watch him.
Just
anyway,
watch every time. Yeah. And he's evil in there as well. You know, he doesn't let anybody off the hook, and he'll take 3 to give one of his. That's the 100%. Kind of guy he is.
I can't wait to see that one. You mentioned Nafuka there earlier on. He's 8-0, a prospect coming through, and he's fighting Patrik Bogdanovic, who is a very good grappler, very, very strong as well. And Nafuka is a fantastic grappler. He's so strong. I want to ask you about him, but I also want to ask about Akon Wanless, who's fighting Shahil Shiraj, a guy who, to me, I view him as someone like Nafuka still. Like, I saw him coming through. I was getting texts from my UK colleagues saying, this is the guy coming through, the next guy from Renegade. And look, it hasn't gone all his way. Still, he's 7-2. He's a pretty good record still at this stage, but Akon Wanless is the sort of guy, I think, like Nafuka, who could become a star from something like this. Like, if one of those two guys was to win this, you know, get that belt, get that big money, they could really go on to the next level, and it's exciting to see. I assume you're looking forward to seeing the two of those guys. Obviously, they're not fighting each other, but in separate fights, might fight each other down the line. It's very exciting.
That's the thing. That's the thing. We're looking at this card, and it could all go. You could draw lines across to each different one, looking at different matchups or styles. For me, same as you, Akon. I was watching him come up, and I was like, "This is the guy." And I still don't know why he isn't. I still don't know why he hasn't got the biggest following, or, you know, the audience aren't interacting with him as much. His fighting style is fun. 7 wins, 7 finishes, well-rounded. You know, he comes out with the showman stuff with the lightsabers and the outfits on, and, you know, plays the crowd. So he's a showman. He looks great. He speaks well, but something hasn't quite bitten. And I think, like you just said, I think this could be the stage and the spotlight that really do it for him. And I also know from sort of speaking to the matchmakers or speaking to Akon, it's so hard to get him fights. He is massive at lightweight. He is massive. I've seen other fighters from the lightweight division come up and speak to me and say, how does he make that limit, that 70 point? How does he hit it every single time? And, you know, for me, this is the car where no one can say no to him. And he said it himself, you know, I'm in the tournament, so no one can dodge me. No one can, you know, if they're in this with me and they progress, they're going to have to fight me at some point. So for him, I think it's without a doubt, and for many of these guys, the biggest moment of their careers. But I feel like him in particular, I feel like there's something that could catch fire, which makes him, you know, look back at this year as the year that changed his life. So that excites me. He's against Sahil Siraj, who is a beast, right? So he's at 9-2 in MMA, but he's had something like 50 Muay Thai K1 fights. 31 of those wins have come by knockout. Calls himself the Knockout Prince. Trains with Reza Medadi in Alicante over there. He's got this newfound love for training, because he never trained in camps before. This is the mad thing. He had that whole professional career in K1 and Muay Thai, and he never had a camp for a fight until 2 fights ago. That was his. That was when he was on FCR. I've forgotten who was fighting, but he fought there, and that's the first time he's actually, scheduled a camp where he's been under somebody, and Reza Madadi was telling him what time to turn up for training, what he's going to do, what to eat. And so for me, I was like, what? You achieved all of that by fighting as an amateur, potentially, like, just having the skills, but not, giving it the best that you could to get where you need to go. And so for me, I feel like he's one to watch. So I think Akon has got his hands full with Siraj, but we'll see how that unfolds. And Nafuka, what a kid. For the Namibian Nightmare, 8-0, I think 7 finishes, 6 submissions, one knockout. He is just the most, I don't know how to describe it, but when I'm going to describe him as a woman in an American movie. When he walks through into a room, it lights up. That's what I'm going to say, Sean. That's it. He's got that type of personality. He's enigmatic. He's, he's infectious. And then when he fights, he does things to fight. It's like Peter Gabal is a great grappler. And he tied him in knots and choked him out in Octagon. And to watch a kid that's 20 years old do that to an experienced fighter, he's earned his spot in this. He's earned this chance. And his story is mad as well. His mom and dad brought him from Namibia to Germany. They lived basically a very poor life. So they went back to Namibia, but then they went back to Germany for a second time, but they couldn't go back to where they lived. So they lived in a refugee camp. So he grew up in this refugee camp with all the stuff and all the, the hardships that come with that type of life. And now he's dedicated every single one of his performances to his mom and to his dad, who worked to give him the means to be able to go and train and do the sports that he loves. And so when you hear these stories behind a 20-year-old kid, you kind of can't help rooting for him. But Bogdanovic, 14-fight win streak he went on in Serbia, then lost to Will Brooks at welterweight, so he went up for that fight, and then he's been back and he's won the last one. He is he's very hard to beat. He's never been submitted. He's clever in and out the cage. He's a law student as well as an MMA fighter, and he's inspired by the swell of support that Bojan Veličković got, the press he got, the media, the following he got from that country. So Bogdanovic wants to sort of follow on in that. So great fights, Sean. Great fights.
Nafuka, I was talking to my guy Sean Denny, who always helps me with the pronunciations and the facts and everything. He was the first one he mentioned, Nafuka, and I was like, okay, I see why when I watch him as well. And to hear that story, absolutely magic. Can't wait to see him fight. The last 3 fights then, with the former champion Mateusz Legerski taking on Mateusz KO'd Roland Pardise against Attila Kormaz. I think a lot of people would know, fought in Bellator and has been around. He had that big knockout against Davy Gallon as well, who, Davy Gallon, a very good fighter. If you're beating him, you're going well. And in the last fight, a Frenchman in Jason Poney against Lucas Rajowski, who, again, another guy who's been around for a long time, who've, if you're like me previewing some of them cards, that's a name that comes up, on a lot of these. So out of those 3 fights, I suppose, what would be the standout to you, or a name or two to look out for?
Yeah, for me, they're great fights. Legerski versus Kohut is an interesting one for me. Legerski is the first ever Octagon lightweight champion, undefeated in Octagon. He's only lost that one fight in KSW. But he beat Kohut quite handily not long ago. So Kohut has got to make some big changes, and he's now training with the likes of Cosma and people like that. So I'm interested to see how Kohut looks in this one. Poney versus Rajowski, that's just oozing experience, both of those two. But the one to watch for me is Paradisa versus Attila Korkmaz. Paradisa is the current Octagon lightweight champion. That belt is shelved. It's on pause for this whole year while this tournament takes place. But he won it. He beat Ivan Bukinga in one hell of a fight and one hell of a performance. He's on, a streak, which is the form of his life. His only loss in recent memory is to Lozan Keita. So those two could meet back up in this. And he's been calling for that fight for a long time. So for me, he's a unique lightweight because of the size of him. I watch him weigh in the morning, and then I do the weigh-ins at night, at the evening. So I see him stand on the scale. From 9 o'clock in the morning, or 10 o'clock usually, as when he weighs in, he'll weigh at the top end of the card, to the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock ceremonial weigh-ins where we do the face-offs. He can put anywhere between 10 to 12, 13 kilograms on in that amount of time. Mad. So that shows the size of this guy. But Attila Korkmaz, you said it, people know him, but he's kind of like been a nomad. He's fought in lots of different organizations, very reputable ones, from, UAE Warriors to Bellator. He fought on ACB back then. He's fought on a number of big shows, and he's always been that guy that, can be the star killer. He's got the skills. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. His nickname is Fearless because he fights like that. He really brings the fight. No one intimidates him. So for me, I think this is going to be a fun one. Paradisa, without a doubt, will have the crowd behind him. But Korkmaz, I've seen it before. I've called the fights where he's silenced that type of crowd. So that again, one to watch.
There's so many standouts, honestly, and I'm even more excited now after talking through them with you. And it's
you got to come to a show, Sean. You got to come and watch a show.
Come to me. Come to. It's all happening here. Then surely bring a show to Ireland at some stage. Considering going to the UK.
We're in talks. It has to happen. And again, we need to get more Irish fights. There was talks of a couple of Irish lightweights potentially being in this, but they didn't get. They signed for other promotions. Damn them. But I feel like we need that tricolour coming through the cards a little bit stronger from now on.
100%. Bryan, thank you very much for joining me. I'm looking forward to watching this card. If you want to watch it as well, check it out. You'll find it everywhere on the Oktagon Instagram and Twitter and everywhere like that, where to watch it in your local area. But for now, Bryan, thank you very much. This was the Sheehan Show, and thank you to everybody for tuning in.